Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The silence of the taiga is never truly silent. There is always that icy breath of wind, the cracking of branches under the weight of snow, the distant howl of a wolf. In this hostile universe, every heartbeat is a struggle, every breath a victory. It was there, in the heart of this white immensity, that Nikolai's tragedy played out. A respected man in his village, a prosperous merchant, he had everything, a warm home, a faithful wife, and the reputation of a solid man. But behind this image hid a darker truth. His heart, consumed by selfishness and passion, now beat for another woman. His wife, Anna, was ill. Fever was consuming her fragile body, and the village healers had already given up. Yet she hung on, her eyes shining with tenderness and trust in the man she had loved for 20 years. But Nikolai, unable to bear the sight of this slow agony, made an unforgivable choice: abandon her. One freezing night, he took Anna to a remote hut in the taiga, claiming she would find rest and tranquility there. There, after laying her on a layer of furs, he murmured a few sweet words, then disappeared, leaving her alone to face the bitter cold. His heart was pounding, not with remorse, but with excitement. His mistress, Irina, was waiting for him. She represented to him the promise of a new life, filled with passion and youth. He thought he was fleeing death, but what he didn't know was that the taiga, witness to his betrayal, never forgives. For in these wild lands, fate watches, silent and implacable. And every step Nikolai took away from his dying wife brought him inexorably closer to the trap that life, or perhaps the spirits of the taiga, had already set for him. The wind blew with a dull rage across the taiga, as if the entire forest wanted to warn Nikolai of what he was about to do. But the man moved forward, stiff and hurried, pulling behind him a sled on which lay his wife, Anna. Her hollow cheeks and pale skin bore the marks of illness. Her lips, cracked by the cold, trembled every time she tried to speak. "Nikolai, where are we going?" she asked in a weak voice, almost broken by the icy breath. He looked away, unable to hold the gaze. "Where you can rest," he murmured, without slowing his pace. The forest was dark despite the snow covering everything. The pine trees, giant and motionless, seemed to silently observe this funeral march. Anna coughed, a dry cough that echoed between the trunks. Nikolai gritted his teeth. Every sound of his weakness irritated him, as if his illness was becoming an obstacle to his new life. Because at that moment, he wasn't thinking about her. He was thinking about Irina. Her bright smile, her fresh skin, her promising voice. Irina was the spring chasing winter from his soul. Anna, on the other hand, was nothing more than a weight, a fading shadow. The sleigh finally stopped in front of an old wooden cabin, lost among the trees. It was still standing despite the years, a forgotten refuge for hunters. Nikolai opened it with a sudden gesture and let Anna inside. He lit a small fire, laid his wife on a bed of skins, and placed a gourd of water near her. "Rest," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll come back tomorrow." Anna closed her eyes, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She believed his words. She still believed in his love. But Nikolai knew he wouldn't come back. When he closed the door behind him, the cold immediately bit his face. Yet, deep inside, a strange warmth filled him, the warmth of newfound freedom. He turned on his heel, determined to reach Irina before nightfall. Behind him, in the hut, Anna struggled to breathe. In front of him, in the heart of the taiga, something was already waiting for him. Nikolai walked briskly, almost excitedly. Every step that took him away from the hut seemed like a victory over fate, over the death that was taking Anna away. The cold bit at his cheeks, but he didn't care, his mind was already elsewhere. In the neighboring village, Irina was waiting for him. A young widow of barely 25, she had eyes as clear as ice and a voice capable of breaking even the most closed hearts. For months, she had been having secret meetings with Nikolai. She had promised him a new life, full of warmth and passion. As he approached his house, a small wooden building with blue-painted shutters, Nikolai felt a fever rising within him, an almost childish impatience. He knocked gently on the door. It opened immediately. Irina appeared, wrapped in a white shawl, her golden hair falling in loose strands around her face. "Here you are at last," she breathed with a smile that melted the frost inside her. She pulled him inside, where a fire was already roaring in the hearth. The smell of hot tea mingled with that of freshly baked bread. The warmth washed over him, a stark contrast to the icy taiga air. Nikolai took his hands, almost trembling. "It's all behind me," he murmured. "Now there's only you." Irina narrowed her eyes slightly, a strange glint crossing her gaze. "You say that, but is it really behind you?" He frowned. "Anna won't survive the winter," he said coldly. "Fate has already chosen." Irina looked away, as if troubled. She had never pressed Anna, preferring to relish the role of secret lover. But tonight, her lips trembled slightly, as if she hesitated to speak. "Nikolai. Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid that abandoning a woman in the taiga would mean challenging something stronger than you?" He burst out into bitter laughter. "They're just children's stories. What I want, I take. And now I have you." But no sooner had he said this than there was a cracking sound outside. Not the wind. Not the snow. But a heavy, isolated footstep, as if someone, or something, was moving around the house. Irina froze. Nikolai clenched his fists. The fire crackled, but a shadow seemed to be forming behind the frosted windows. Fate was already knocking at his door. The silence thickened in Irina's small house. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to hesitate to crackle, as if the flame were holding its breath. Nikolai approached the window, slightly drawing back the frosted curtain. Outside, night had settled in, dark and heavy. The half-veiled moon cast a pale light on the snow. And there, between the dark trunks of the pines, he thought he saw a silhouette. Motionless. "He's just a hunter," he said quietly, more to convince himself than to reassure Irina. But Irina shook her head. "Hunters don't approach houses at night. And this one, he doesn't move." Nikolai abruptly closed the curtain, as if to erase the vision. He tried to regain his confidence, but a cold sweat was already running down his back. Irina placed her hand on his. "I told you you couldn't escape fate. Abandoning a woman, alone, in the forest. The spirits of the taiga don't forget." Nikolai sat up abruptly. "Enough of your superstitions. They're just stories to scare children. Anna is doomed by illness, not by ghosts." But at that moment, a dull thud sounded against the door. 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. Irina paled, her eyes widening in terror. "Nikolai, don't open it." He, on the other hand, rushed to the door, seized with nervous anger. He opened it abruptly, out of breath, ready to scream. The cold rushed in, biting at his cheeks. But no one was there. Only the windswept snow, and footprints, deep, wide footprints, stopping abruptly at the threshold. Then, before he could react, a howl rang out in the distance. Not a wolf's howl. Deeper, longer. Inhuman. Irina made the sign of the cross, her hands shaking. "It's not an animal. It's something else." Nikolai felt his throat tighten. For the first time in a long time, he was lost for words. The taiga reminded her that she never forgets. Nikolai slammed the door shut, his heart pounding like a war drum. The wood rattled again, as if the house itself shuddered from the shock. Irina had taken refuge near the hearth, clutching her shawl to her chest. Her eyes stared at Nikolai, filled with a mixture of fear and reproach. "I warned you," she whispered. "You can't run away from his actions." He clenched his fists, refusing to give in. "They're just footprints, Irina. A hunter, a wanderer, anyone. Nothing more." But his voice lacked strength, and they both knew it. Outside, the wind resumed its mournful wail, but this time it was accompanied. Between its gusts, Nikolai distinguished another noise. Regular. Slow. Like heavy footsteps crushing the snow, moving back and forth around the house. Irina clapped her hand over her mouth, stifling a scream. He goes around. Nikolai armed himself with an old rifle hanging on the wall. His hands trembled slightly as he loaded it. If he dares to come back, I'll show him who he's dealing with. But deep down, he knew his bullets might be useless. For the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the house, tirelessly, tracing an invisible circle that was closing. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Silence fell again, heavy as a stone. Nikolai approached the window again, his eyes staring out into the night. And then, in the icy reflection of the glass, he thought he saw a face behind him. Pale. Feverish. Anna's eyes. He turned around abruptly. No one. Irina, alone, stared at him, stunned. A shiver ran down his spine. And in his mind, a thought imposed itself, implacable. What if it wasn't a hunter? What if it wasn't the spirits of the taiga? What if it was her, who came looking for him? The night was growing thicker, and the silence of the taiga was becoming almost unbearable. Nikolai paced the house, the rifle clutched in his hands, while Irina remained hunched over by the fire, her eyes staring into the flames as if seeking refuge there. Suddenly, there was a cracking sound from inside the house. Not outside. Inside. Nikolai jumped, pointing his gun at the shadow. Who's there? Silence answered him. But the air had changed. Heavier. As if someone had just entered without opening the door. Irina stood up slowly, her lips trembling. Nikolai, don't you feel it? He frowned. And then, he smelled it. A scent. Faint, but unmistakable. The scent of medicinal plants and feverish sweat, the scent of Anna, when she spent her nights fighting off illness. A voice then rose up, soft and distant, as if carried by the wind. Nikolai. He almost dropped his rifle. It was her. It was her voice. Irina put her hands to her ears. Do you hear it too? Oh Lord, she's here. Nikolai shook his head in panic. No, no. She can't be here. But when he dared to look towards the mirror hanging near the fireplace, he saw what he feared. The reflection. Behind him, Anna's emaciated silhouette loomed. Her hair disheveled, her lips blue with fever, her wide-open eyes staring at her husband with icy intensity. Nikolai turned around abruptly, his heart about to explode. Nothing. Only the mirror preserved the image. Irina, in tears, fell to her knees. She came for you. She won't leave, not until she takes you with her. Nikolai, panting, felt his strength leaving him. For the first time in his life, he no longer had any certainty. And outside, as if to seal the prophecy, the footsteps began again. Faster. Closer. Destiny had just crossed the threshold. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting trembling shadows on the wooden walls. Every crack of the wood sounded like a warning. Nikolai, his face ashen, still held his rifle, but his hands trembled so much that the metal rattled beneath his fingers. Outside, the footsteps circled the house again. Faster, more insistent. Like a macabre dance. Sometimes they stopped abruptly. Then they started again. As if something were playing with them. Irina cried silently, her swollen eyes staring at the door. Nikolai, she wants to come in. Shut up, he suddenly yelled, as if to chase away his own thoughts. It's just a hallucination. An illusion. But at the same moment, a dull thump shook the door, as if an invisible fist had struck furiously. The wood groaned under the impact. Nikolai stepped back, his breath coming out of him. It's not possible. Anna's voice then echoed, clear and icy, through the walls. Why did you leave me, Nikolai? Why did you abandon me in the cold? Irina screamed, covering her ears. Nikolai, mad with terror, fired a bullet toward the door. The noise exploded in the small house, the blast of the detonation rattling the windows. When the smoke cleared, the door still stood. But on the wood, there was now a mark. Not a bullet hole, but a handprint, black and burnt, as if etched into the material. Nikolai backed away from the wall, his eyes bulging. Lord, it's her. Irina, pale, knelt on the ground. It's not death that comes, Nikolai, it's your fault that comes back. The fire suddenly went out, plunging the house into icy darkness. And in that pitch blackness, two bright, pale, feverish eyes appeared above the fireplace. Anna was inside. Nikolai felt his breath catch. In the pitch darkness, only those two eyes shone, fixed and inhuman. He tried to raise his rifle, but his arms suddenly felt as heavy as blocks of stone. A figure emerged from the darkness, slowly advancing towards him. Anna. But she was no longer the frail woman he had left in the cabin. Her skin, marked by fever, shone with an unearthly pallor, as if ice itself had taken hold of her body. Her hair fell in damp strands, and her blue lips sketched a smile without warmth. Nikolai, she said, her voice echoing in her bones. I've been waiting for you. Irina screamed and collapsed against the wall, her hands clutching her face. It's not human, she whispered, sobbing. It's not her. Nikolai stepped back, his back hitting the table. Anna, listen to me. I couldn't. But she drew closer. With every step, the ground froze beneath her bare feet. Frost crystals were already creeping up the walls of the cabin, smothering the wood in an icy layer. The warm breath of the dying fire was gone, the air was now filled with the chill of a grave. Anna raised a trembling hand, but her palms shone like frozen glass. You swore you'd stay by my side until the end, Nikolai. You broke your word. So now. I've come looking for you. Nikolai, panicking, finally raised his rifle and fired. The explosion ripped through the room. Irina screamed. Smoke filled the air. But when it faded, Anna was still standing there. Untouched. Her smile widened, revealing white teeth that were anything but human. Nikolai dropped his weapon. His legs buckled beneath him. For the first time, he realized he was no longer facing his wife, but what the relentless taiga had made of her. Irina, petrified, whispered into the icy darkness. She's come for you, Nikolai, and nothing will stop her. A terrifying cracking sound rippled through the house. The walls, the beams, the floor, everything was covered in a thin film of ice. Every second, the cabin seemed to transform into a crystal tomb. Nikolai was on his knees, breathing in ragged gasps, his wide eyes fixed on Anna. She moved forward relentlessly, her steps freezing the wood beneath her bare feet. Irina clung to the wall, her fingers bloody from clawing at the icy wood to escape. Leave us. She begged. Please. Anna turned her head toward her, and her icy gaze pierced her. Irina collapsed to the ground, her body convulsing, as if that single glance had robbed her of all warmth. Nikolai yelled. Don't touch her. It's me you want. Anna stopped, her smile widening. Well, you understand. With a gesture, she raised her hand. Immediately, the rifle abandoned on the ground was covered in ice, shattering into pieces. Nikolai felt his lungs tighten, each breath became painful, as if the air itself were turning into blades of frost. He backed up to the wall, trapped. The door, the window, everything had disappeared under a thick layer of translucent ice. Even the fire in the hearth went out with an invisible breath, leaving behind frozen ash. The cabin had become a tomb. Anna crouched in front of Nikolai, her face inches from his. Her eyes were no longer those of a woman, but two icy chasms where he saw only his own death. You chose to let me die alone, in the taiga. She said, her voice echoing inhumanly. So you too will die alone, trapped in the cold. Irina, half-conscious, murmured prayers. Nikolai, trembling, tried to grab Anna's icy hand. Sorry. I beg you. But upon contact, a terrible burn ran down his arm. His skin instantly became covered in frost, cracking like glass. A howl of pain filled the hut. And outside, the entire taiga seemed to fall silent and listen. Nikolai lay on the ground, his arm covered in frost up to his shoulder. Every movement made him cry out, as if his veins were turning to ice. Irina, huddled in a corner, was barely breathing, her eyes filled with silent terror. Anna stood in the center of the cabin, ghostly and icy, her hair dancing as if animated by an invisible wind. Around her, the cold condensed into floating crystals, forming a luminous spiral. Nikolai, she said in an implacable voice. You swore to love me until death. But you chose another. You left me alone in the night, and the taiga heard my last breath. Now it demands yours. Nikolai tried to sit up, his wild eyes searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run, the walls, the roof, even the floor had become living ice, slowly closing in like a cage. Irina moaned. No, not me. I'm not guilty of anything. Anna slowly turned her head towards her. You shared his lie. You drank in his adulterous love. The cold will not spare you. Nikolai screamed in a heartrending voice. No. Leave her. I'm the traitor. I alone. His knees hit the ice, his bloody hands desperately clutching Anna's feet. Take me, but spare her. A heavy silence followed his words. Then, slowly, Anna's smile faded. Her icy eyes seemed to probe Nikolai's soul. Finally, you're telling the truth, she breathed. But it's too late. She raised her arms. The spiral of ice tightened around him, rising and rising, until it encased him in a translucent prison. Nikolai screamed, his cries echoing like thunder in the night. His body was already freezing, his tears freezing on his cheeks. Irina watched helplessly as he gradually disappeared, engulfed by a column of frost. Anna then looked at her, and said in a whisper. You are free. But remember, the taiga never forgets. With a gust of icy air, Anna's figure vanished, and the cabin fell silent again. But at its center, the icy prison still shone, and at its heart, Nikolai, frozen forever, his eyes wide open in horror. Dawn broke over the taiga, painting the snow with a pale, fragile light. The wind, which the previous night had howled like an angry animal, had calmed. A deathly silence reigned, broken only by the cracking of branches under the weight of the ice. The villagers, worried that Nikolai would not return, had organized an expedition to find the cabin lost in the forest. They walked slowly, their eyes worried, their footsteps leaving tracks in the untouched snow. When they arrived, the sight that met them froze their blood. The cabin seemed intact from the outside, but a veil of frost covered every plank, every window. The door was slightly ajar, as if it had been touched by an invisible hand. They cautiously stepped inside. The fireplace, cold and dead, no longer radiated any heat. On the floor, in the center of the room, a column of translucent ice rose from the floor to the ceiling. Inside, frozen in an expression of absolute terror, was Nikolai. My God, one of the men murmured, unable to look away. Irina, found outside, was trembling on her knees, her eyes fixed on the frost. She recounted everything, Anna's face, the footsteps in the snow, the cold that had invaded the cabin, and the inexorable judgment of the taiga. The villagers dared not utter a word. They knew that something inexplicable had just happened. The forest, silent and immense, seemed to have taken its revenge. Nikolai's frozen body remained there, imprisoned by his choice and the eternal cold. As for the cabin, it remained imbued with an invisible presence, like a silent warning to anyone who would dare betray love or challenge the lives of others. And in the wind, sometimes, the inhabitants swore they heard an icy whisper. The taiga never forgets. Thus ended the story of Nikolai, punished by the fate he thought he could escape, and of the taiga, the implacable and silent judge, guardian of betrayed oaths.